welcome to my Best of 2022 book video. I had a particularly awesome year this year, which means that not only did I start this booktube channel, but I also had some amazing projects that led me down the path to find some amazing books this year. I decided to divide up these books by why I liked the book. I came up with 4 categories. The first one is going to be my thinker category. These are the books that really just made me change my mind, change my behavior, or really gave me a really good option to have a lot of discussion about. The next category is going to be characterization or relationships. I have some really good books that had some solid characters or some really interesting dynamics between 2 different characters that made me love the book. Then I have the unapologetically fun category, because I'm not going to apologize for loving these really fun books. And then the very last category, the uncategorizable books. Yes, that's right. I tried not to have this category on here, but I failed. I'm sorry. First, Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dychenko, I think. This is a Ukrainian fantasy book and is unlike anything else I've read. It really just pulls you through the book with the characterization and the mystery of trying to figure out where they're going to go. Because unlike in most books, I had absolutely no idea where this book was going to go. And for good reason, because even though I finished to the end, I am still kind of confused on where this book is going to go, but in the best way. I would highly recommend this book if you want something that's going to challenge you and be different than anything you've ever read. There's no tropes in this book that I'm familiar with. It was all wholly alien book. And the second book is coming out in 2023 and it's being translated into English, so I'm really excited about it. The second book in this category is Too Like the Lightning by Ada Palmer. This book was a book that I read as part of the Hugo Challenge this year because it was nominated for Best Series, and it's the first in the series, Terra Ignota. This book was, again, uncategorizable because it's such an ambitiously successful book. I mean, she sort of reinvents politics and has this fantastical element that is not explainable by science and yet kind of explained by science. I don't know, it's very difficult to explain. What I can tell you is that this book was full of incredibly deep themes. It was very, very heavy and dense, but it was fun to read, and I can't wait to read the rest of this series. However, I haven't been able to get to it because my TBR is giant, but I do plan on reading the rest of this series, hopefully in 2023, and I had to include this book on this list this year. So now let's get into the thinkers category. These categories are in no particular order. The first one I have on this list, why not start with a deep, heavy one? It is Blindsight by Peter Watts. I know I've talked about this book on my channel because it had such a deep impact on me. I still am not convinced that I absolutely got everything that was going on in this book, but those questions that he got to at the end were just something that really stuck with me, something that I don't think I have read anybody else who has done before. I thought this book was truly excellent and a really interesting discussion about humanity and our biases, which is, again, he did it so well. The next book on this list is a book called 1 Second After by William Fortune. 1 Second After is not necessarily the heaviest book on this list, but it was a book that made the end of the world, or the end of at least the United States government, real to me. And it was a book that impacted, policy in the United States, which is one of the reasons why I picked it up. It was just so relatable and so real and so interesting. It made me honestly kind of a pseudo prepper and wonder, maybe I need to go buy extra soap or shoes or water. And because of that, I think it was a book that belongs in the thinker category. The Sheep Look Up by John Brenner. John Brenner is a name I recognize, but I've never read anything by. This book is a dystopian novel, and he's kind of a master dystopian guy, I guess. This book was one that I really didn't know a whole lot going into, and is definitely a heavy, a little bit melancholic, sad, tragic book where we're following multiple different characters and all of the characters around those characters. A little bit complex here, but it's just about about how the world sort of fell apart and what it looks like now. It was just a really deep thinking book for me, so I put it on the list. The next one is one that I have talked about, and that is Metro 2033. This is a book that I probably didn't enjoy very much as I was reading through it. It was a lot of heavy exploration of themes. While Darkness was a really cool character, I don't think I really fully appreciated this book until I had finished reading it and let the book simmer in my mind for a little while. I definitely started to appreciate how much that author explored as far as human coping mechanisms and how far we're willing to go to survive. I mean, he explored all of humanity's cultures. I feel like he explored politics and religion ad nauseum, and he finally also explored how humanity is so stubborn that we're impossible to talk to. I think it's a really interesting, very amazing book, and apparently a really cool video game, so I hope to check that out. This is a book that will probably come back up on my channel again. The next book is A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, or Vinge, I guess. This could be a standalone book, although I do believe it has a sequel. He just plays around with so many complex ideas, not just with aliens, not just with the relationship between humanity and aliens, but also he adds in AI in the mixture. He adds in some really interesting ideas with physics. I just thought this book had so much to offer. All you have to do is get through it, and some parts of this book are a little bit more dense than others, but it's 100% worth it at the end. So I really liked this book, so it had to be on my list. Calculating God by Robert Sawyer. This book is not a difficult one to read, but I really liked that if you dig into this book, rather than being particularly preachy, it was a book about what does it take to change your mind. And I really appreciate that thought. I haven't read a whole lot of books that really made me sit down and think about that question before. I would highly recommend it, although I do warn you that I think you have to get it secondhand because it is out of print. The next book I have to include is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. Of course, this is a big classic book. It was one of the best. I have so many thoughts about this book that I end up going silent. I think that this book is spectacular. It's one of the best science fiction books out there, and it easily crushed a lot of books on my top science fiction list and changed a lot of orders in that. This book will be coming back up on my channel very soon, but I loved this book. It had so much to offer and hasn't really been done, even though it was such a groundbreaking book. So if you haven't read Childhood's End yet, this is one that I recommend you go check out. Another one is a book that was published in 2022, and that is A Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. This book was recommended to me by one of my friends, Miguel, and I'm so glad he did. This book was a first contact novel that isn't aliens. It's actually octopus. And we didn't really recognize that they were sentient until suddenly we do. I can't really explain it any better, but this book is for fans of Arrival, but they do some different things. It's a little bit more complex than Arrival, but I really loved this book. It was definitely the most outstanding book that I read this year of the books that were published in 2022, and it will probably be one of my Hugo nominations this year. Feed by M.T. Anderson. This is a YA book. I realize that YA books don't really make my list very often. This book was believable and it was fun and it was interesting, and I find myself constantly recommending this book. This book was one that I highly recommend that you listen to because there were some components that were just stronger listening than they were reading. So if you get a chance, this is one that is or could be available at lots of people's libraries. So check out Feed by M.T. Anderson. The last book on this list is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. This book was the dystopian novel written in 1920 that inspired 1984 and Brave New World to be written. And it is kind of a perfect melding of the two. It was a little bit more hopeful, and it was written by a Russian political dissident who was really against the communist government and the USSR at the time. I really was impressed with this book. For some reason, it was easier read for me than either 1984 or Brave New World, and it was just a pleasure to read. It was such a good satire. It was so prescient. It had to appear on this list this year. So that does it for the thinkers category. Now let's get into those books that were great for characterization or relationships. And I only have 5 on this list this year. The first one is The Sparrow by Mary Russell. This book has a lot of kind of a cult following in the sci-fi community, and it is a book that tackles a lot of heavy topics, including science versus religion and first contact. This book was a heavy book for me. I really enjoyed sort of the beginning and middle, and then the end just kind of didn't impress me very much. When I finished reading it, I just kind of was like, oh, that's it? I'm not really interested in this, and I kind of put it away. And it wasn't until it had simmered a little bit and I got used to the book and kept thinking about it that I really came to appreciate what this book is and what it means, and I really understood the book in a better way. It kind of snuck onto this list in terms that I didn't initially enjoy the ending, but the characters in this book, the relationships of a Catholic priest who struggles with faith and a married woman who struggles with love, and how all of that works together, and all of the different ways in which all of these characters were tempted for all of the things that they believe, is such a strong standout in this book. The Book of M by Peng Shepherd. I know I have mentioned this book also on this channel, but it is definitely a post-apocalyptic book that has some fantasy elements with it. It's really not about the post-apocalypse or the fantasy elements. It's really about the characters, the husband and wife, and how they're struggling in this world and the situation that they couldn't have anticipated in trying to hold on to each other and hold on to their love and hold on to their marriage. And it was that made this book so beautiful. The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This is a fantasy book. However, it's not the fantasy that makes me love this book. It is obviously the characters and their relationships. Very few books in general, especially in fantasy, focus on a middle-aged housewife. And this book just had that standout quality of having a woman who is more mature and really understanding her past and her present and what she foresees as her future, and trying to come to terms with the decisions that she made to get herself in the position she's in. There's a lot of expectation hangover in this book. There's a lot of depression, but also struggle to be happy in where she's at right now. A lot of people, I think, who haven't gotten to middle age won't appreciate this book the way that I did. And I think that if that's you, that's okay. I want to move on to the next book now because I don't want to get into any more spoilers there. And that is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I think that everyone has talked about this book on their channel, and it's for good reason. This book lives up to the hype. The things that this book says about what your intelligence correlates with your happiness level and all of the different complex themes around that is really hard-hitting and really hard to swallow. So I'm gonna say it, I guess, one more time. I recommend this book. It is an easy book that you could get through in a week. The last book on this category is going to be another 2022 release, and that is When Women Were Dragons. This book had a very weird, funny premise, which is one of the reasons why I ended up picking it up. But it has very much a literary feel. Even though there's dragons in the title, and even though it's technically classified as fantasy, there really isn't a whole lot of magic in this book. This book is actually about a girl and the relationship that she has with her mother, and how they get through that relationship throughout their whole lives, and how it changes, and how she comes to understand things that she didn't when she was younger. So this book is 100% about the characters and the relationship rather than the magic or the world building or anything else, because if you go into that book looking for fantasy, it's not going to be satisfying. But I really thought this book was a standout, and I am considering this book as a potential nomination for the Hugos for next year, so definitely consider checking this book out. The next category we have is the one that you've probably been waiting for, and that is the Unapologetically Fun category. So again, these are books that are not just palate cleansers, although that typically tends to be why I picked them up. These are books that have to stay with me. These are books that are continually recommended by me to all of my friends and nearby neighbors. Poor neighbors, right? So the first book on this list is going to be We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis Taylor. This whole entire series is amazing. And I did start it last year, but I finished it this year, so I'm going to include it on this list. This was a book that I think is awesome for every fan of the genre. It is for people who are brand new to science fiction, but it's also more loved by people who have been in science fiction a long time because he makes a lot of funny commentary about all of the tropes that we see in science fiction. I really recommend this book series. It was so much fun, and I will also highly recommend the audiobook for this series because Ray Porter, who also did Project Hail Mary, does a spectacular job on this series. The Light Brigade by Cameron Hurley. I know I recommend this book a lot, but it was really good. It is a military science fiction book. There is some really fun ideas in this book, and I think it's one of the better military science fiction books that have come out within the last couple of years. It was just one that was very fun and easily relatable, and I just had a really good time with it. I really, really love what Cameron Hurley writes, and I will read everything she comes out with. QualityLand. This is a book from Germany about how the YouTube algorithm and Amazon sort of take over the world. It is very much a satire, very irreverent book that had so many deeper themes, but the deeper themes were what made me like this book and simmer on it longer. But the fun, parody, hilarity that goes on in this book is what made me put it in the unapologetically fun category. Envy of Angels by Matt Wallace. This is a novella series that I read that was a really good, fun, irreverent, tongue-in-cheek, awesome time. It definitely takes place in a kitchen where some recently graduated chefs have to go and cook in this kitchen for demons. There are some trigger warnings because it is rather irreverent on the religion side of things. I really recommend that you go check this book out if that's not something that's going to offend you, because I think it was just written as a fun, good time, and I tend to recommend this novella series quite frequently. Another book that I had a good time with this year was Hollow Kingdom. This is a zombie apocalypse book told from the perspective of a pet crow whose name is a bad word. This was just so many funny moments. I laughed out loud so many times that people might have thought I was a little crazy in some of the coffee shops I frequent. I think this one was a good time. It was very funny. It doesn't really have a whole lot of zombies in the book, but it is about this pet crow and his coming to terms with the fact that his human is now a zombie and he has to go save all of the house pets of the world. And it was just a fun book. I definitely think that if you need a palate cleanser that will probably stay with you a little while, this one is your book. And finally, the last one on this list, but not the least, is a self-published author, but I highly recommend the audiobook, and that is Dungeon Crawler Carl, written by Matt Dinneman and voiced by Jeff Hayes. This is a series that is a lit RPG, which is, again, not my usual style, but I picked it up because I have a couple of brothers and sisters who recommended it to me, and this one is an amazing character who just got stuck in a really ridiculous, silly situation that is so fun. Jeff Hayes, who is the audiobook narrator, does such a good job of bringing this book to life, and if you're looking to stretch your sci-fi genre genes into other areas or subcategories of fantasy or science fiction, I don't know really where that would be considered in. This one was just an enjoyable series. I haven't finished it yet because I'm trying to stretch it out, but I started this series and was a little bit hesitant, but it was just something that I think everyone would enjoy. And that does it for my list. Thanks for watching. Please let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of these books or if you'd recommend any others, and I will see you next time.